The hum of the military transport plane always had a way of clearing my mind, but on my flight back home after a grueling 14-month deployment, my thoughts were in absolute turmoil. I was an active-duty Army specialist, having just survived the intense heat, sleepless nights, and constant pressure of an overseas tour. Through all of it, the one thing that kept me going was the thought of the future I was building. Every single month, I had been sending a significant portion of my combat pay back home to a joint savings account I shared with my father. The plan was simple and long established. That money was my hard-earned nest egg, meant to help me buy a house and finally start my civilian life once my service contract ended. My dad was a hard-working, honest man who had always supported my military career, so I trusted him completely to manage the account while I was offline in remote areas. But what I hadn't accounted for was the venomous influence of my stepmother, Vivian. Vivian had entered our lives 3 years ago, marrying my father after a whirlwind romance. From day one, she made it clear she viewed me as an outsider and an inconvenience. She was a woman who lived far beyond her means, obsessed with high-end designer brands, expensive country club memberships, and maintaining a lavish lifestyle that my dad's modest salary could never fully support. While I was risking my life thousands of miles away, Vivian was quietly plotting. Because my dad trusted her implicitly, he had given her access to his financial files, a mistake that would soon dismantle our family's trust. I first noticed something was wrong during my final month overseas when I tried to log into my banking portal to check my balance. The screen flashed an error, showing that the password had been changed from a recovery email that wasn't mine. When I finally got a spotty satellite connection to call the bank, the representative delivered a crushing blow. The savings account, which should have accumulated over $40,000 of my deployment and combat hazard pay, had been systematically drained down to a mere $12.43. The shock was paralyzing. The bank records showed dozens of massive transfer withdrawals over the past year, all routed to a private account under Vivian's name. When I tried to call my dad to ask what was happening, Vivian intercepted the calls or made excuses, telling me my dad was too busy at work or resting. She even had the audacity to text me, warning me not to stress my father with financial drama while he was dealing with high blood pressure. That was the moment I realized she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was actively isolating my dad to cover her tracks. I decided right then to keep my mouth shut, act completely normal, and wait until I landed on solid ground. I spent the rest of my transit compiling every bank statement, transaction receipt, and transfer log into a secure digital folder on my phone. I was preparing a battlefield assessment, and Vivian was the target. When I finally arrived at my dad's house, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. My dad welcomed me with a massive, tearful bear hug, looking noticeably older and far more exhausted than when I left. Vivian stood just behind him, wearing a fake, plastered-on smile and a brand new designer gold watch that I knew my dad could never afford on his own. Throughout dinner, she kept trying to steer the conversation away from my future plans, nervously chiming in whenever I mentioned my savings or my desire to look at houses. I watched her closely, recognizing the classic signs of a guilty suspect trying to control the room. I kept my composure, playing the part of the tired, oblivious soldier, waiting for the perfect tactical moment to strike. That moment came later that evening when my dad and I went down to his basement workshop, his sanctuary, to grab a couple of cold drinks. Vivian had stayed upstairs, believing she had successfully managed the situation for the night. I closed the basement door behind us, locked it quietly, and turned to my father. He looked at me, sensing the sudden shift in my demeanor. I took a deep breath, looked him straight in the eyes, and told him we needed to have an incredibly serious conversation. I pulled out my phone, opened the folder containing the bank records, and handed it to him. I watched his face turn from confusion to absolute horror as he scrolled through the transactions, seeing his own son's combat pay systematically funneled into Vivian's personal accounts to fund luxury retail sprees, spa days, and high-end jewelry. "She told me you agreed to loan her some of your savings for a family investment," my dad whispered, his voice trembling as the devastating realization set in. He looked completely broken, his eyes filling with tears of betrayal. I placed a hand on his shoulder, keeping my voice calm and steady, just as I had been trained to do in high-stress situations. I told him the absolute truth. I had never authorized a single cent, Vivian had locked me out of the account, and she had actively threatened me to keep me quiet. Seeing the pain in my dad's eyes quickly morph into a righteous, protective anger was the turning point. He realized that the woman he loved had not only exploited his trust but had actively stolen from his son who was serving his country in a war zone. We walked upstairs together, side by side. Vivian was sitting on the living room sofa, scrolling through her iPad, completely unaware that her house of cards was about to collapse. When my dad threw the printed bank statements onto the coffee table in front of her, her face drained of all color. She tried to spin a web of lies, stammering about misunderstandings and family expenses, but my dad cut her off with a cold, commanding authority I hadn't heard in years. He told her he was filing for divorce first thing in the morning and that she had exactly 1 hour to pack her bags and leave his house. I stood right there beside him, a proud soldier protecting my family, letting her know that if she didn't cooperate, the military police and civil authorities would be the next ones knocking on her door for grand theft. As Vivian packed her things in a frantic, weeping panic, my dad looked at me and apologized for letting her into our lives. I told him he had nothing to apologize for. We had taken a heavy hit, but we stood together, stronger than ever, ready to rebuild our lives on a foundation of absolute truth.